Greetings, everyone. Yes, the lesser known but awesome heroes are back. And I told you guys that I was going to talk about somebody from the surveys, and that I was going to choose one black DC superhero. Well, these said characters are going to be all combined in one. So, without further ado, let me talk, of course, about the first one that we are looking at, and that is Mark Spector, also known as Moon Knight. And with Moon Knight, sorry, I have a bit of a a lump in my throat here. Give me just a moment. Yeah. Alright, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, Spector. What is there to tell about Moon Knight? Well, I'll start with Mark Spector, the man himself. Now, Spector was a freelance mercenary, and he worked for this really crazy Haitian voodoo guy called Bushman. Or at least I would say he was kind of a voodoo Haitian kind of guy. He was really creepy. And Spector worked with his group, and they had went to Egypt with an archaeologist as part of an expedition and as protection, while this archaeologist was trying to uncover, of course, ancient relics. However, Bushman and the gang shot the archaeologist in the head, tried to basically rape his wife and daughter, who was actually still a teenager. Oh, and they also wanted to steal the treasure. Now, Spector, being kind of slightly a man of honor, was like, hey, this isn't part of the deal, this isn't right, what the hell are you doing? And he fights Bushman and ends up being beaten half to death and left pretty much to die. And he is then rescued by Egyptian cult worshippers. And however, it is shortly in the next panel of the comic revealed that, oh, these are the worshippers of the Egyptian god of the moon and vengeance, Khonshu. And Khonshu comes to Spector in a vision and tells him, if you become my avatar on Earth, then I will grant you the strength that you need to defeat Bushman. So Spector in this dream, he acknowledges it, and then Spector actually wakes up and believes and stares face to face with a statue of Khonshu that had a silver cloth wrapped around it. And Spector, believing that he might have been hallucinating, but remembering what the god had said, he ends up taking the silver cloth and wraps it around him, almost kind of like a tunic or a hoodie or a wind parka, whatever you want to call it. And Spector believes in his mind that this tunic, this thing that he's wearing, has mystically imbued him to basically fight off Bushman and all the other guys. And he had presumably killed all of them and rescued the archaeologist's wife and his daughter. And believing in what Khonshu had said, he took the statue of Khonshu, took this tunic, and fashioned it into a costume which you see here. And Spector would take all his mercenary money, give the archaeologist's wife and daughter a nice place, but he would also use the money to fund his own corporation. And that's where the comparison to him being next to Batman comes from. And Spector has a lot of crazy gadgets. He has crescent darts, which are these crescent moon-shaped projectiles that are very similar to batarangs. He's got the moon glider, which is almost kind of like the Batwing. It's a giant crescent moon airship. Spector is an extremely agile hand-to-hand combatist. He has Egyptian-style weaponry, but he has since lost those particular items. But Spectre also has, interestingly, an adamantium staff, like a bow staff. So, and Spectre is also very handy with firearms. However, since he became the avatar of Khonshu, he doesn't really kill people. He'll maim and maybe possibly cripple them, but he will never kill someone unless it is out of vengeance. And he's got silver spiked knuckle busters, silver boots, etc. Everything's like silver. Everything's got a linear part to it. And I bring up the silver aspect because when Moon Knight debuted, the first person he fought was Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night. And that was where Spectre debuted, where he had caught Russell. However, he would later set Russell free, and he and Werewolf by Night would have a few more tussles until eventually Spectre would actually meet up with Peter Parker, Spider-Man, who would also be an ally to him, as well as Captain America and many others. However, Moon Knight was considered by the superhero community in the Marvel Universe to be a bit loopy, because they believed that Khonshu was just a voice in Spectre's head, and Spectre would sometimes hallucinate, thinking that Khonshu was actually talking to him. And this is possibly due to the fact that because in a lot of the older comics, Spectre had 3 personalities. He was a cab driver, a socialite, and I cannot off the top of my head remember the third identity, but because he had to keep living these 3 separate lives, it took a psychological toll on Spectre. So he is very strong and unsusceptible to psionic attacks. Not even Professor X can pierce his mind. And there was a point where Spectre, presumably through supernatural means, was actually merged with Khonshu, and with each phase of the moon he gained a certain level of super strength. However, this was later recanted to possibly be just a hallucinogenic effect on Spectre that he put on himself. And Spectre lately in the comics has been used quite a bit more. I would say he's on the level with Luke Cage and Carol Danvers as far as being a very used character in Marvel, and I like that because Moon Knight as a character, Moon Knight's actually a pretty cool character if you actually give him a chance to read it. Matter of fact, I actually remember the first time I picked up a Moon Knight issue, he was fighting supposedly a reincarnated version of Bushman, and he took a crescent dart after he had just broken his legs from falling from a skylight and shattered his knees on a fire escape. He took a crescent dart and basically cleaved Bushman's face off. Yeah. Hell of a way to introduce yourself to a new character. But as I read more and more about Mark, I started to actually like his character a lot more. You know, Moon Knight's not psychotic. He's very disciplined, very strict on himself. He believes in what he does. He believes that what he does is vengeance and is righteous. And up until recently, he was part of the horrendous Shadowland storyline, but what I really found interesting is that Steve Rogers inducted him as one of the first members of his Black Ops Secret Avengers team. And I found that really interesting because Moon Knight, he can work in a team setting, but he kind of is more portrayed as a lone wolf type character. But I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of what they're going to do with Moon Knight in the future, and hopefully it'll be some really good stuff. Because if not, well, one sad character like Daredevil that they're going to destroy over at Marvel. And it's a damn shame because Mark Spector, I think, deserves a little bit of limelight. Because he truly is a very obscure and lesser known character. But moving on from Moon Knight, I'm going to talk about my about my first DC character coming back. Yes, I'm doing 2 characters in one video. And this was one of the characters that I picked for a DC animated short, and also, I tie this guy up with Firestorm. It's a tie between him and Firestorm, but Jefferson Pierce, also known as Black Lightning. And I like Jeff. Jeff is actually, he's a pretty cool character, and he's got some pretty cool abilities. Jeff was a young man growing up in the suicide slums of Metropolis, and it was called the suicide slums because anybody that lived in that ghetto believed that, oh, the only way to escape is to commit suicide. And his dad was accidentally killed in a mafia hit, so it was tough times for him and his mother. And eventually an Italian shopmaker opened up a shop right in their apartment building, and he became a positive father figure for Jeff. And Jeff would excel at athletics and would have a very strong interest in teaching. And Jeff would actually inspire a dream where he actually went to the Olympics. He actually participated in the Olympics. And he would later go to the Olympics again and win a decathlon. And he would gain 15 minutes of fame and such. And he only returned to the suicide slums for his mother's funeral. And he would eventually sire with his ex. He would sire with his ex his first daughter, Arissa, who is the superheroine known as Thunder. And later on, Jeff would have another daughter, which was Jennifer. And for those of you who don't know who Jennifer Pierce is, she is the JSA member known as Lightning. So, like father, like daughters. And Pierce would later actually, after the whole deal with the suicide slums and his ex-wife actually leaving him, because she believed that Pierce was just trying to get out of the ghetto rather than make a change, and Pierce, seeing that nothing had changed after everything that he went through, even getting a teaching degree, the first thing Pierce did when he went to the suicide slums was, he's like, okay, nothing has changed, this is still a hellhole, still a ghetto, there's still crime, I'm going to make a difference. So what Pierce ended up doing is that he ended up having this force field belt made that could generate electricity, and he then took the guise of Black Lightning. And he would push out a drug peddler. He would try to teach some rowdy students some stuff, and one student that was going to change his life around basically got murdered, and his corpse was left in the gymnasium of the high school that Pierce became the principal of. And Black Lightning's vigilante ways had caught the eye of Superman and many other Metropolis-based heroes. But then it also caught the eyes of the Dark Knight. It caught the eyes of Batman. And Batman, who kind of got tired of the League, ended up forming his own superhero group called the Outsiders, and the first person he called in was Pierce. And Pierce would join the Outsiders at least 2 or 3 more times. One of those times was when he was framed for murder and had to lay low. And later on, Pierce, after the man that had been his father figure died while he was fighting a gang called the 100, who were trying to take over the suicide slums of Metropolis and etc. and so forth. Pierce, in a fit of rage, discovered that the force field generator, because he had used it for so long, he basically, and I don't know if it's been recanted or not, so I'm just going to go ahead and presume by what I at least had read, he had wore the force field belt for so long that his body started to develop the metahuman ability of storing electricity. And over time, Pierce would later have a psychological block on his abilities, because during a fight between him and some gang members, a little girl was hit by a stray bullet that he deflected, and Pierce would be traumatized by this little girl's death, because it would put a psychological block on his powers. And it wasn't until Batman basically pushed and prodded and basically did all he could to just get Pierce riled up that Pierce would eventually activate his powers again. And Pierce would later make amends with the parents of that child, and he would redeem himself in the eyes of the public. And throughout his career, Pierce would also see his ex-wife again, and he would actually become very good friends with her since she was a member of a public relations firm. And things would actually look up and up on Pierce, because he would gain the respect of Superman, Steel, Batman, and many other characters. Another hero that he would meet that would also really kind of push him to be a member of the JLA would be, Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. And Oliver and Pierce would hit it off really well and would become great friends. And there were many, and eventually the suicide slums would actually start changing. Not just that, but just in general, Pierce would start making a difference, and he would start feeling like he was on cloud 9. And it was then that he would have, of course, Lightning. But then Pierce would also, at one point, I believe, become the leader of the Outsiders. And it's a whole lot of information for me to try to process, so I'm sure I'm getting a few facts mixed up and wrong here. Pierce would also, when Lex Luthor became president, he would be a member of the president's cabinet. So Black Lightning's had a very interesting and almost, dare I say, historic career in the DCU. Not too shabby for an obscure black superhero. Pierce has had quite a few interesting things happen to him. And let me talk about Pierce's powers, because Pierce has some crazy powers. This dude, he has electro manipulation. He can basically at will store or discharge electricity of any volume that he wants. He can basically store it within, or he can just let it out in short bursts. He actually can now use an electro form, which basically he can turn himself into presumably pure electricity and can glide across power lines or through ionized air. There was even one point, and I would love to see this in a comic because this just sounds so completely whacked out and over the top, but Pierce can presumably actually, he can ride lightning bolts. Just think about that for just a moment. He can actually ride lightning bolts. What? What? I mean, seriously, I'm sorry, but I know his name's Black Lightning, but even then, that's just, to me, that's weird. And Pierce, actually, under Batman's tutelage, would be a master martial artist. He's a master teacher, simply in the fact that he's got a bachelor's and master's degree in teaching. He can teach English, but he also teaches poetry. And he also will teach history as well, if I remember correctly. But getting back to his father figure, I'm sorry, I'm getting facts mixed up again. Okay, the Italian guy that had been his father figure, it's later revealed with the 100 that he held Pierce and his mother out of a sense of guilt, because he was actually the man that assassinated Pierce's father, and he felt so guilty that he basically took Pierce in almost like a son and tried in his own way to feel that he should atone for that. Wow. Just wow. That's deep. I don't care who you are. That is deep. And later on in his career, right where he is right now, Pierce would later finally and reluctantly, after rejecting the offer twice, he finally joins the JLA as a reserve member. And Black Lightning, even though he's on the reserve list, he's a very high reserve. I mean, he can now ionize the air with his electricity to stop bullets in midair. He can create a force field. He can now turn into pure electricity or have an electrical form. He can glide across power lines, ride lightning bolts, do whatever. He can actually fly. I could go into all of the electro-based abilities that Pierce has. Probably one of the most humorous, and what adds to the over-the-topness of Pierce is that he can even trace radio signals. But if it's like something way too subtle, then he can't really track it. But I'm just like, I mean, they're making Pierce sound completely overpowered, but at the same time, I like that. And honestly, I will stand by my belief that Pierce is actually what inspired Sucker Punch to create Cole McGrath for the Infamous games. Because there's stuff in the Infamous games that when I see Cole do it, I'm like, Pierce can do that too. So, but that's just my pure opinion on that, though. I wouldn't quite quote it as like, biblical, like, hoopla. But I'm gonna talk about why it took me so long to get back to the polls and why I chose Pierce. I'll start with Pierce for a little bit. I chose Pierce because, there aren't too many black superheroes that really get the limelight that I think that they deserve, but also just in general with DC, let alone Marvel, there are so many obscure characters. And some get used more. Black Lightning and Moon Knight are two of those examples. But I guess in a way, to those of you that are new on my subscribers list, but also those of you that have been following my channel but don't really know why I do Lesser Known But Awesome Heroes, I do it for the simple purpose that, Batman is cool, Superman's cool, Wonder Woman's great, but I do Lesser Known But Awesome Heroes because there is a whole wealth of characters, not just from DC, not just from Marvel, but just in every single comic book that no one really examines, no one ever really talks about. And so the whole point of this segment is to do exactly that, to do justice to characters like Jefferson Pierce and Mark Spector, characters that may be going on the up and up, and characters that may not have kind of fallen into obscurity or aren't really used properly or even at all, and characters that deserve attention. And when I did my polls, I still have the numbers, guys. I'm sure a lot of you have probably left by now or think that I'm an asshole. I have not forgotten about it. I still have the polls. I'm still going to look back through them. But I thought, Moon Knight was one of the many highly requested Marvel characters, so I got him out of the way. And plus, as a bonus, it was a character that I wanted to talk about on Lesser Known But Awesome Heroes anyway. So think of it as a bonus. Black Lightning, I thought, I wanted to do a black superhero. And, I was originally going to pick John Henry Irons, but I flipped between him and Jefferson Pierce, and Pierce was the one that came out. So there you go. Mark Spector, also known as Moon Knight, and Jefferson Pierce, also known as Black Lightning. Two lesser known, but extremely awesome heroes. Anyway, guys, that is it. That is all, at least for now. So stay tuned and drop a comment on if you want. Drop a comment for requests and whatnot. But enjoy and have a nice day.